Welcome, eCom Logistics Nation. Thank you for joining today's episode. We're on a mission to share e-commerce logistics insights, trends, successes, and challenges from the leaders and innovators in our space.
Why didn't they just ask the customers? Why not start with the customers and solve problems leveraging technology? So instead of kind of this inside out product development, why don't you pull outside in to build tech?
Welcome, eCom Logistics Podcast Nation. Today, Nanad and I are super excited to welcome our good friend, Maia Benson. We met Maia back when she was global head of shipping and fulfillment at Shopify, where she spent about 5 years. She's had an exciting career leading and advising product teams, specifically in the B2B space. And a couple months ago, joined Forum Ventures as managing director. Maia, it is so great to have you join us today. Welcome.
Hello, old friends. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You know what, Dan, we say this on almost every opening. We go, we are super excited to have someone, and which we usually are, right? But Maia's kind of different. I just have to say that to the audience, because when we kind of started the podcast and I'm thinking about, okay, who are going to be the guests? Like, who are we going to invite? And literally one of the first few people in my mind was like, oh, we got to have Maia on the conversation. You know what I'm saying?
Maia's a no-brainer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So Maia, it's actually super exciting to have you on.
Well, it's great to have the band back together. I think we all had the opportunity to first connect back in 2017 over some delicious Olive Garden lunch. And I think there was just an immediate shared kinship amongst all of us entrepreneurs at heart to really seize the opportunity, candidly, to democratize delivery promises for everyone else. Yeah. So, grateful to have known you guys for as long as I have and seen all the success that you guys have had and continue to have with this new venture called Fulfillment IQ.
Absolutely. And
thank you.
And when it comes to B2B SaaS, I just have to say this, of course, I'm in the warehousing distribution space for a while. And by the way, that timing was around 2015 or 16, I would say, I think, right? It was very early stage where I had started getting into doing software as a service, taking what I knew about distribution and getting into it. And my exposure to Maia and to the Shopify brand, right? It really opened my eyes to what it means to be a modern tech B2B SaaS type organization, right? And the entrepreneurship, because I remember the first meeting that we had very vividly, where you had a few folks that came from your end and from Shopify's end, and we are all sitting around the table, and I'm like, I'm the principal at FedEx here, and we're talking about, okay, I have a business analyst with me and another analyst with me, and then Maia's like, I got these two other people that are managing shipping, but this person used to own this company before, and that person used to own another company before. And it was just that pure entrepreneurial spirit of building an organization. And it was eye-opening. And I think I learned a lot from there on what type of culture was I stepping into. Well, hopefully I've done a pretty good job at it, but it was really eye-opening. Some of the initial conversations and things that we did together back in the day. So
yeah. I mean, Shopify, with its cultural values and orientation, just does a great job attracting entrepreneurs and founders at a DNA level into the hive and the fold. So you're absolutely right, Nanad. And I think that was kind of one thing in the early days that really made Shopify special.
So Maia, let's go back to, because I love that. And obviously you have such a deep rooted passion for working with entrepreneurs, specifically as we've gotten to know you in the logistics space. Maybe let's start with your background, because you have such a diverse background in logistics and product. Maybe start by sharing your story and your journey with the listeners, and where does this passion come from, to specifically work with these founders and entrepreneurs in the space?
It's a great question. So I am the great-granddaughter of entrepreneurs, period, hard stop, and wasn't really self-aware that I was an entrepreneur, candidly, until really kind of post-business school. So I'll tell you a little bit about that journey. After I graduated, I ran out to San Francisco and really spent most of my career with the big tech market research firm called IDC. And it was the late 90s, early 2000s. And these were the times when you had these brilliant engineers birthing brilliant technology and coming to third parties like IDC, either venture funding or just raised their first round of venture funding saying, where's my product market fit? What customers will buy this technology? And we added value to that equation. We helped, very clearly understand sizes of markets, competitive landscapes, and bridge introductions to customers so that, IDC did a great job on those fronts. But what stuck with me was, why didn't they just ask the customers? Why not start with the customers and solve problems leveraging technology? So instead of kind of this inside out product development, why don't you pull outside in to build tech? So I had that kind of early realization, went back to business school with that thesis, and then rolled out and got very fortunate to really found and scale kind of my first product, which was SEO. So this is back in the late 2000s when people would build their websites, but really candidly not optimize them for Google's, algorithms to be found, right? So that birth of SEO and then coupled with SEM, we grew that product and that value set from 0 to 40 million in 2 years for small law firms at LexisNexis. And I had an amazing partner in crime on the tech side that I built this with. And that's really when I started to realize, geez, this is fun, right? I guess I'm an entrepreneur, right? I come from a second generation set of entrepreneurs, but even after spending all that time in Silicon Valley during kind of tech boom and bubble number one, if you will, I didn't have that self-realization until I actually got to try and build something on my own. So that's kind of when Maia realized she was an entrepreneur herself, and then really had spent about 10, 12 years building net new SaaS products and platforms. And that's a really key perspective, right? It's very different to build software as a standalone application vis-a-vis contribute core web services to a larger platform. So did that for 10 to 12 years or into kind of general manager, portfolio manager, when candidly after doing that for non-digitally SaaS native companies, wanted to stop being the salmon swimming upstream, orchestrating full transformation for multi-billion dollar corporations, and really head towards a startup or a growth company. And coincidentally, that's when Shopify called and said, hey, we're new to this shipping thing. We're pretty good at R&D, but Maia, why don't you come help us drive really everything else? And so that's kind of this bucket of commercial, which was strategy, go-to-market, pricing, embedding third-party tech natively into our product and platform. So that's a little bit about kind of Maia's journey towards entrepreneurship through being an intrapreneur for decades, and, kind of a little bit of my orientation for the passion. And Dan, the passion is a really good question. Like, part of this, I think, is just a DNA level builder passion, a DNA level helper, context, which makes me wake up every morning so very excited to either build stuff myself or help others build. So, I'm so proud that and so lucky and so fortunate that all of us are growing up in our shared nation. I'm going to bring the US and Canada together.
Absolutely. We have to.
They mostly are. They mostly are that, people fought and risked their livelihoods to come here and self-fulfill their own destiny. And that bravery is a deep origin, I think, for the passion I have to help to get up every morning and build and help. So that's a little bit of a Maia intro and some context.
And I guess you continue doing that, right? Now in your new role as an entrepreneur and an entrepreneur, helping other entrepreneurs kind of see the light. Maybe like if you want to touch on, like, you did a Medium post that speaks to what you will be doing there that people can read about. But for the listeners, what's Forum? What are you doing at Forum?
Yeah. So I got super lucky in meeting Forum. So I had been working for the past year really on advisory and investment portfolios of my own. And through that, got to know some of the venture firms. And along the way, had actually co-founded my own luxury fashion NFT company and realized how hard it is to be a founder. There's a loneliness that exists. Every day is a kind of a mountain to climb and a live-die paradigm. And even with an amazing co-founder, it can be a lonely existence. And even with amazing networks and amazing experience sets and amazing resources at one's disposal, it's just hard. Through that experience and getting to know different venture firms and venture models, what I realized is there were different altitudes a venture and a spectrum, if you will, of early stage venture partners, where some were checks only, and you guys know this well, and some uniquely were on another end of the spectrum, which was really deep hand-holding and support to bring founders from 0 to 1. And 1 is that next raise. And so through my interactions, I got to know the Forum team, really loved how they thought of and evaluated some of the deals that we shared, and really recognized that they believed and had a decade plus of success with this high touch approach. And then the cherry on top was, all of us know we're living in a day and age where capital is not equally distributed. And so there's an underlying mission at Forum as capital allocators to also make sure we are investing in the next generation of amazing founders from, incredibly diverse and underrepresented backgrounds. So that mix, with the addition of another cherry on top, in that I get this really cool hybrid operator and investor role, and the ability to do more of what you guys are doing and bring this kind of supply chain logistics, next gen eCom ecosystem closer together, where it was just an opportunity set that I couldn't say no to. So that's what's unique about Forum. And as you mentioned earlier, Nanad, it's a B2B SaaS only focus. If you're a founder out there and you want true partner, true fractional co-founder, we would welcome the opportunity to connect with you at Forum.
Absolutely. By the way, with so many cherries on top, that should now be a cherry cake. I just got to say, right? Like the whole cake is cherry, but
that's our next core first principle for our dinner in New York. We have to go somewhere that's got some cherry. I'd throw some chocolate in there too, my friend. So,
to the point that you just made, right? Like B2B SaaS from Forum Ventures perspective, are you managing only a certain segment of the industry, or is it, if people were to talk to you, of course, at the end, we'll kind of bring up how they can reach out to you, but like, what does the portfolio entail for you, right? Like, is it B2B SaaS, any industry vertical, or is it like wide open?
So early stage. So we have a studio program and fund, an accelerator program and fund, and then a seed, parentheses, also pre-seed fund. So we really have a portfolio of funding options for founders with different profiles. All of it is B2B SaaS. So we are horizontal, highly focused early stage, but horizontal across that. Maybe spend a slightly disproportionate amount of my time with next gen eCom logistics and supply chain friends, absolutely, and founders. At the end of the day, all of us in the logistics world serve a marketing value set. We are now revenue generators. So it's critical, I think, to be uber cognizant of what's happening in marketing tech that can be thoughtfully used and merchandised for everything that happens on the back end. I get to use my brain outside of logistics and e-commerce lands. And I think in a lot of ways that fuels and enriches the perspective of all the ops stuff that we do to really serve a larger purpose, which is, like I said, we're no longer on the cost side of the equation, friends. We're on the revenue side of the equation.
Completely makes sense. Something I just have to, as an observation, just have to call out is before Forum as well, right? Like you introduced me and Dan to a few people where you were advising. My observation to startups and entrepreneurs is if an entrepreneur recognizes that you need advisors, right, from the industry, you can have the greatest idea, but having the right advisors make a world of difference. And I'll give an example. I won't name names or companies, right? But I will say this. I've seen someone that you brought to the table that does something that I've seen similar out in the market before, right? And the stark difference, one company is very well funded out in the market, is still not able to win as many deals as this new startup with the right advisors in place. The stark differentiation between that is something that has made me now believe, as I think about startups, and doesn't matter how many people I know in the industry, I want a good group of advisors around me on how I should be building my business. Because it could mean the difference between success and failure, right? Like having the right advisors in place. And forget about the startup equity or whatever you are paying through to actually make it happen. And this is through you, Maia. I just got to call out like how critical this happens to be.
You're hitting on something that is such a first foundational principle from my point of view as a founder. And by the way, your comment is fantastic, but I think the advisors that one attracts and chooses is a direct reflection of the founder's value set. And I think we are all in this logistics and supply chain value chains, two value chains, very deep, very wide. We are all carving new territory. We are not rebuilding what Amazon vertically has built over the past 15 years. Many of us are in the value chain building parts of that and having to be friends with the legacy that exists. And so the spirit of my point is, I think founders with a DNA of asking for help are naturally outsized winners. And the advisors they can attract to support them in the journey and to unlock opportunities faster for them is really a reflection of them, fundamentally understanding that DNA. And then lastly, I don't think you can be a founder in this logistics ecosystem and not be very thoughtful and mindful of asking for help and partnering with other friends, because as we all know, folks, we're in a systems game.
Yep.
Right? We're in a systems game. And if you're not friends with the two value partners to your right and your left that will sustain your value proposition, you'll be less successful. People that operate in systems by definition can't be isolationists and have to reach out and work together.
Absolutely.
I'll add another story to that, Maia, too, because I can remember shortly after we met, we were at IRCE in Chicago with you, and we're at a rooftop bar, and you're like, Nanad and Dan, I've got to introduce you to these two guys, Dhruv and Devay, right? Co-founders of ShipBob. And we got together and we sat down, we had a couple adult beverages, and we just talked shop for an hour or two. But what was interesting for me is at that point in time in the evolution of ShipBob, they might have had 25,000 square feet of space. I remember Devay saying how excited he was that they just got their first forklift that week. So super early innings for those guys. But in going to your operation background, you identified something. And that's where, you saw something, you were at Shopify, and maybe just your ability to kind of see something very, very early. And to this day has been very impressive to me with some of the companies that you advise. Again, I credit that to your operations background and business acumen to be able to see something before. And ShipBob now, right, is a household name in the e-com logistics space, unicorn status. Maybe talk to us about where that comes from. And again, I don't think it's all about luck, right? I mean, there's definitely a lot of intelligence that goes into it. And maybe just as you were at Shopify Fulfillment at that time, maybe compare and contrast how you saw their journey towards, what you were looking to build at Shopify.
Yeah, I think if there's one thing that is connective tissue that is a good maybe origin place to start is it goes back to what I said. Building technology and products for customers is a very deep orientation of mine. Part of it's born out of a deep empathy to really understand what would make their lives better. And also part of it is born out of a deep DNA level efficiency gene I have. So don't work as hard. You got other hard problems to do. Let's make this one easy. And so through the first product that we built at Shopify called Shopify Shipping, we got to know a lot of our merchants, right? So literally would meet with them as frequently as I could across the nation and saw firsthand that Shopify Shipping really helped them fulfill the orders themselves. But once they got to 20 or 50 orders a day, they really ran out of time. And the sacrifice of time till 2 a.m. meant that they weren't focusing on growing their business. So that kind of initial insight, and then also talking to Toby, our founder. I mean, he has a great story. He founded Shopify, as we all know, first as an e-commerce tool set to fuel his snowboard store. Mm-hmm. And Toby tells great stories about putting a backpack on his back in the winter, cutting a hole in the bottom, shoving the snowboards through and biking down to Canada Post to fulfill his orders. So I think that insight in living with these merchants, empathetically seeing what it takes to stay up till 2 or 3 in the morning packing boxes is a real pain point. And so that kind of made me think, like, what more can we do here? At that time, and to your point, the 3PL landscape and the apps that we had on our platform to solve that problem were really immature, right? These were the early days, and traditional 3PLs candidly would price themselves out of serving these small but high growth merchants, right? So you just had a totally different ecosystem back in those days to meet these folks' needs. So those were some of the genesis of the opportunity. And then I was the first to segment Shopify's merchant base and quickly realized, wait a minute, there's enough merchants and enough volume here to really, help them outsource this work. Part of my role was, the genesis in driving a lot of the early Shopify fulfillment strategy, but it was also working with the developer platform and ecosystem. That was kind of another side wing of my team's responsibility in meeting, like you're saying, the ShipBobs, the ShipMonks, the Ship Heroes, the Delivers, when many were a couple slides
FedEx fulfillment.
Or had FedEx fulfillment, totally, absolutely, to welcome, and grow that ecosystem on the platform. So Shopify merchants, ultimately could win. That's the anchor for me that really kind of most of my product orientation sits with, which is just build for and alongside your customers and deeply, deeply understand their pain points and their workflows, and don't limit yourself to what market segments are in pain points should be served.
If you were to think about, right, Maia, over the last little bit, I would say 8 years, you touched on this. When you kind of stepped into that space and you looked at the mid-market or the smaller merchants that were trying to get 3PL services, we had a very different environment, right? Like 3PLs were very used to fixed price contracts, or they had contracts that were fixed variable. There is other type of contracting strategies. But what people needed was transactional. And over the last 7 or 8 years, the industry has moved so much into that transactional space. And I do have to say, Shopify was probably one of the biggest catalysts in driving that behavior in the market, because it was easy to understand. And it wasn't Shopify itself, but as 3PLs evolved to accommodate the need of the Shopify merchant base, that type of pricing strategy kind of came into play. And now it's commonplace. Like, that's the expectation. Anyone in the mid-market, the price sheets are out there. It's open. It's no longer, hey, let's have a phone call, or let me take you out for a drink and then explain what my negotiating pricing is going to be for 3PLs. And it's truly got into the SaaS type of environment where you would expect a transactional pricing. And we saw it together, the entire journey of that happening in the industry. So,
there was FBA, which was pretty public with some okay transactional pricing, but to your point, and then there was everyone else. And it's really important to calibrate sometimes how new this next generation of logistics and supply chain is. I mean, we're talking 2017, and there was still a mass pivot from pallets to parcels, right? And to looking at and extending serving markets beyond really candidly enterprise apparel and footwear. So, that evolution at scale really started kind of 2015 and beyond, and has become the exciting venture-backed community that we're living in today. And it's still early innings, right? You have this market dynamic right now that you've got a ton of venture-backed tech and full stack 3PLs being born. And then you've got a community of tech being born that's not trying to solve the end-to-end, but trying to knit together the disparate legacy pieces. And I think, that's a very interesting dynamic that will continue to evolve. Will omni platform folks like the Shopifys and the Walmarts kind of capture a lot of that volume and share, or will you see retailers not kind of sacrificing their existing and preferred infrastructure and looking to great companies to help knit them into the omni channel, the omni warehouse?
I mean, just talking about that as well, Maia, right? Like, so there is the 3PL strategy, and specifically in the SaaS space. What's your opinion around owned infrastructure, right? Like Amazon, right? Like it's the perfect example. Own your own infrastructure versus orchestrate other people's infrastructure with your own tech, right? Like there is differing opinions on where does the market go. And again, I haven't been able to completely settle on what wins personally. And I don't think if I could predict, I would invest in the right place. But what's your opinion on that particular strategy? As a merchant, should that matter to you? Is it your own infrastructure? Are you 4PLing the entire business? Or is it your own infrastructure? So, the quality standards, etc., are going to come from that. Does it really matter?
We are in a state of innovation and fragmentation right now that is making the what strategy of I need a great, affordable delivery promise. That's what I need. I need a delivery promise that drives conversion that I can afford at a unit economic level. Does that mean it's a space race to 1 or 2 day for everyone? No, that's not what it means. But that is the end state. And there has been so much exciting innovation and the birth of so many different companies to empower that we're now looking at a how that has optionality. Before, when Amazon built this, they didn't have optionality, right? They had to build.
Yeah.
And so I just want to kind of orchestrate and make it very clear we're in transitory, if you will, state right now towards some end world. What do I think that end world looks like? I think ownership of the core or the anchor of your fulfillment to give you direct control over, a large part of your fulfillment and, not cutting out margin for a third-party middleman is probably a very smart strategy for many merchants. And then there is a value for having excess flexible capacity or unique and differentiated capacity. So regulated goods, oversized goods, you get the point. That might be smart to look at through partners. So I think inevitably a hybrid strategy is what, where everybody lands. That's a Maia hypothesis. And to your point, Ninad, if we could predict the future, we'd be in a different, well, I'm a little bit in that. I'm a little bit more in that business now. But the long story short is I think we're at a really exciting time where you're seeing a lot of people approach the market from a growth perspective through partners. A, it's a faster time to market. And B, we're within a transition period of time where, that makes sense. Yeah. And by the way, I'm not saying that might not always make sense. We just have to be very conscious. People at that, if that's the model, so what has to be true for that model to scale and win? I think the defining criteria are people are trading flexibility and resiliency for a little bit of a unit economic. Yes. And that can be an okay trade.
And so talking about unit economics, right? The one thing that I see and, look at the history, try and kind of understand how some of the bigger models have worked up until this point, right? Like, so I come from a very traditional 3PL space, Target comes to DHL or to FedEx and goes, build me a building, right? That can run this.
Yep.
And as you look at how do you bring the unit economics of each parcel down, it is through capital investment. Because labor and real estate happens to be some of the biggest problems. So it requires capital investment to actually make it happen, which is in automation and robotics, et cetera, et cetera. That is the only challenge that I see today in the non-owned infrastructure because the contract terms being 1 year, 2 years, it's just not enough runway for a 3PL to be able to invest in automation to bring the volume and throughput that's necessary. If I was to look at the crystal ball and start predicting, we need companies that are in that environment need to start solving for how can I do longer term partnerships with my 3PL? I can still be the orchestration engine that can then invest in the necessary. And maybe, we can create gain share, pain share type of models where if there is robotics, if there is more automation in play, then we can bring the unit economics down. The 1 year, 2 year contracts are really hard to justify to go and say, I'm going to even bring in a very simple AMR type robots in the building, right?
Yeah, I agree with your point. Where risk can be shared so that long-term capital investment in partnerships, that is absolutely a baseline DNA that should occur. I think another first principle to kind of add to this conversation set is, what Amazon magically did was bring, data and tech, demand forecasting, inventory distribution, and order routing. And they stuck that on top of people, process, and three-dimensional warehouses and three-dimensional boxes. Yeah. And they brought those things together. And those are very different animals, as we all know, to bring together. So Amazon almost being born, data tech with physical is a very, very special and unique DNA. And a lot of this next generation of software-only folks with that software-only DNA, right? Guys, this is test and learn. This is the land of electrons. This is highly disposable, right? That DNA has to get very comfortable and friendly with banging those electrons up into the land of atoms that all of us know don't budge as fast, and they're not as disposable, right? And they live in a three-dimensional world with a ton of context, like weather, bad roads, and hungover employees. Yeah. You get my point.
Absolutely.
So I think again in this kind of point around, we're in this really exciting growth part of our evolutionary curve. I think those atoms and electrons DNA sets are, being more and more kind of brought together. And I think that's got to continue to strengthen, period, hard stop.
Yeah, makes sense.
And I think, Maia, I would love to continue on that and maybe even get your perspective on what the next 3, 6, 12 months look like and what excites you into space. Because I think, as we all came out of the pandemic, there was this excitement and there was this feeling that eCom was going to continue down the same hyper growth state it was in. And that hasn't materialized, right? This peak is going to look different, right? It's going to be a little off. At least that's what we're thinking right now. And then we've got all these headwinds in front of us, these economic circumstances we're dealing with. In the last weeks, days, months, we've seen Facebook, Meta, Twitter, Lyft, Stripe, Shopify all have double-digit layoffs. So, and some are even saying too, like the chicken has come home to roost, right? Because there were a lot of checks written. There's a lot of money out there, and the investment community, is not being as patient as they have been in the past, or at least that's my perspective, and they're looking for their return. I love what you said before, right? We are in a state of generating revenue. So maybe taking all of that, I'd love to hear like what segments of the market, and again, knowing that you're laser focused on B2B SaaS and spend a lot of time on the logistics supply chain side, like what problems are you excited that founders are solving? And how do you kind of see this playing out, over the next, handful of months?
So gravity is now in play. That's kind of what I've been saying. We're not living in the anti-gravity world anymore. Look, the three of us are very fortunate in our careers to have lived through and built and grown businesses in different economies and in different macroeconomic landscapes and cycles. Okay. So I just think that's a really core and key first principle. Many of us have fortunately seen this movie before. So there's part of me, both as an early stage investor and a personal advisor and investor, that thinks there's tremendous opportunity for founders to flex that maturity muscle and get back to first principles. And the first principles are build great product for and with your customers, delight them, and earn revenue. So, on one hand, this gravity, I think, is a really positive thing. With my new hat on and as an investor, we're already seeing the market shift. I think, Nanad, you said this in your opening, like founder friendly to more venture friendly, if you will. The spirit of that point is this is really the time where the cream's going to rise to the crop. And founders that know at a first principles level, they have to build real value and solve very core business problems. This is not a nice to have world that we're living in. This is a need to have world. Candidly, are going to do just fine. So in terms of like where I see at a first principle level, opportunity, that's actually not an easy question, right? But we all live in such rich end-to-end supply chain value chains and logistics value chains. I still see at a very core level, first principle opportunities to solve sourcing. How do I get the right products or the right inputs to build my right products? That is still hard to do, especially in a landscape where we have to remember, friends, China is still zero COVID policy, right? They shut down, right? We're seeing it now. iPhone supplier is going to be, is going to have a knot in it, and there's going to be some delays because of that. So sourcing, a diverse sourcing strategy, especially democratizing that and accessing that sourcing for small to medium-sized companies, still a tremendous opportunity. High quality, affordable transportation, still an opportunity. I think 3PLs that can not only deliver great service and great unit economics, but underneath that build differentiated cultures and infrastructure in this land where labor is constrained and therefore can switch across the street to earn an extra $1 an hour. Returns, if China can shut down whenever COVID rears its ugly head, that means the onshore inventory is that much more valuable and needs to get back to stock immediately so it can be resold. So, just top of mind. And then, of course, there are the holy grails, guys, that just continue to remain, very hard problems to solve, especially in all this volatility, which is, demand and forecasting, inventory allocation, and order routing. Like these are very hard problems. So, other ones, I know we all live in this, like, I can't underscore it enough. We live in an omni-channel. I sell everywhere. Omni-fulfillment, I have multiple fulfillment providers. Global, I do this on a global basis world, right? The amount of orchestration that it takes to coordinate and effectively drive the delivery promise that you have, promised in these different channels with different warehouse providers is hard, right? So that's another area that I'm passionate about. And probably lastly, everywhere I sell, my order data and customer data comes in different ways and different formats with different metadata behind it, right? So rationalizing that so I can drive a really clean and very thoughtful and very personalized experience with my customers across different channels is also a very, very hard problem to solve. So those are some of the areas that I'm pretty bullish on, and there's still a lot more work to be done. But founders that really look at, am I a nice to have or am I a need to have? Am I very clear on the path to how my value translates into commercial value exchange in the form of dollars, are gonna do just fine.
It's such a good kind of list and summary that you just provided, right? It's essentially back to basics. At the beginning, you mentioned we saw the first bubble pop, right? This is the second big bubble that's popping at this point. And I think it's the fundamentals that you get 20x valuation on your top line, right? Like even this was happening outside of, the logistics space, just as brands were getting that type of like 10x valuation on top line, right? Like we started treating brands like startups or tech startups as an example. All of that's about to change. And it's, to a certain degree, that's a good thing. We need to go back to basics and fundamentals.
It's a good thing. 100%. And the other thing that is really exciting is the talent gets redistributed, right? For years, the big unicorns hoard all the fantastic talent. Yeah. And now some of that spout is putting the talent back in market, to your point, Dan, on what you said earlier about all the layoffs. And that's really healthy, and I hope a lot of those folks go on to start really building again and build that cultural DNA with them. It's also going to be an interesting time for companies that have grown up in these go-go, low interest rate, cheap money times to see how those leadership kind of navigate these headwinds. So I think that's the start of another conversation and another chapter that we're just going to be seeing. Leaders out there right now cutting, 20 to 50% of their staffs literally overnight. And that is a tremendous, yet to be seen downstream, effect. When you're in a culture and that much change happens overnight, for most without their input, the remaining employee and cultural value and tone is also at risk. So guys, like it is going to be, I think these early layoffs and these early moves are just the first dominoes that we're going to see being pushed into, downstream chains that have yet to be unlocked. But overall, concentration of talent is really bad for America and the American dream. Yeah. And so I think the redistribution of that and hopefully birthing a lot of new companies will be a great outcome from these times.
Yeah. Awesome insights. Maia, thank you so much for joining us. It's been awesome spending an hour with you. Want to give you the opportunity to give a plug for Forum Ventures. Maybe how do people learn more about it? How could they follow you on LinkedIn or anywhere you are on social? So yeah, please, where can we learn more?
Thank you kindly. So this is probably a second plug. So I think I squeezed one in earlier. But I would highly encourage everyone to find me on LinkedIn, _Hudstop. I'm not really a big media person for better or worse. So LinkedIn is a great way to just personally find me. Forum, as I mentioned earlier, is got a portfolio of funds and founder programs to meet and greet founders where they're at with the right partner and right first check. So I'd really encourage everyone to check us out to learn more about those programs. And yeah, welcome everyone in the B2B SaaS world. And I want to also state the obvious. We, even on the capital asset world, think hardware. There's nothing dumb out there anymore, meaning there's always a SaaS component behind connected hardware. So I just want to also make sure the universe understands we at Forum are not afraid of that and those business opportunities. It still counts as B2B SaaS to us. So thank you, Dan, for the opportunity to welcome founders to reach out to me via LinkedIn. And so awesome seeing you guys, number one, and having just a friendly chat here.
Absolutely. I look forward to the next one now, Maia. Thank you.
Yeah, me too. To your point, some cherry cake here in
exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Maia.
Be sure to subscribe to the podcast to maximize your supply chain. Available on all major podcasting channels. Thank you for listening and see you in the next episode.